My name's Cathy Disbrow, and welcome to my needle felt pansy tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to create a pansy flower by needle felting all 5 petals, connecting them together, and then decorating your pansy flower. At the very end of the video, I do talk about how to glue on a pin, clip, or magnet so you can make something fun with your pansy flower. You need 3 tools to make a pansy flower. You need a felting surface. I'll be using a foam pad, but you can also use a brush tool. They're both great for felting pansies. I'll be using a single felting needle during the tutorial. I do talk about multi-needles. One has 5, one has 3. I do a quick demo before we start the tutorial just to show you how to use those because I don't show that during the tutorial. And you need wool. So I have wool batting and wool roving. I primarily use wool batting during the tutorial, but I do talk about how and show how you can use roving to create your pansy petals. So this is a great all levels project. So if you're a seasoned felter, you can just use maybe 4 to 5 grams from your stash to create these flowers. And that's 4 to 5 grams in total. So if you're making all one color, right, kind of thing, right, you can measure it out that way. If you're brand new to needle felting, I highly recommend watching my Basics of Needle Felting video on my Woolly Doodles YouTube channel. You're going to learn all sorts of things that you may not learn during the tutorial, and it'll really help you get an understanding of felting in general. If you don't have any supplies and you want to get supplies, I do have felting kits available. I have ones that come with foam pads and ones that don't. And it comes with wool that you can make maybe about 8 to 10 pansies. It comes with 2 felting needles. I also have some written instructions and photos for those people who might want a little bit more than a video. And I do have a template that also has some photos of pansy flowers. So the template I'm talking about is this one. And what I've done is I've created so you could use this to measure out your pansy petals. If you want that, it's available to anyone. It is included in the kit, but anybody who wants that template can have it. All you need to do is contact me. So you can email me, you can go through my website or social media channel. That information is located in the video description below or at the end of this video. So let's talk about pansy flowers because that's what you're here to do. So here is a bunch of different pansy flowers. It's just a printout that I use it as a guide. There are so many different kinds of color combinations and flowers that you can make. So this is really great if you have a lot of extra wool bits in your stash and you don't know what to do with them. It makes a great pansy, right? There's just so much that you can do with all that extra wool, right? So there are 4 different kinds of pansy flowers. There is a clear-faced pansy flower, and that's the one that all 5 petals are the same color. There's the multicolored pansy flower, and those are the ones that have the 3 front leaves are a different color from the back 2 leaves. The pencil line are the ones with the little thin lines that radiate from the center of the flower. And then you've got your monkey face, and that's the one that has a little black face on it. So you can see there's many different things that you can do with the pansy flower, and that's what makes it such a great project. So why don't we get started and let's make some pansy flowers. Okay, so before we get started to make the pansies, I just wanted to show a quick demo of using the Clover needle tools that I had mentioned in the intro. So here is the 5 needle punch tool. You can see it's got 5 needles, and this is a 3 needle pen tool. So I've already pre-created these petals, and so once I usually start by felting with 1 needle, then I'll come and use the punch tool. So what I'm doing is now I have 5 needles that are connecting the fibers together a lot faster than 1 needle. Now when you use the punch tool though, there's not as much control, so you'll definitely want to keep tidying up with your single needle. Now you can use this 3 needle tool. Sometimes I'll take one of the needles out and you could use this as well. I find for the pansy petals I prefer to use the punch tool. And the other tool you could use is, I was talking about this brush, this Clover brush. So what, again, I usually do is I find that the punch tool goes in a bit smoother when using a brush. But the thing is, like, once I stab in on the other side, it fuzzes out more. So what I tend to do is, once I've got the shape and the density with the punch tool, I'll usually take it over to my foam pad to finish up. And as you can see, I'm just rubbing my hands on there, and it's bringing those fibers in. So that's just a quick demo, and let's get started with the pansies. Okay, so here we are on my pad, and this is a pansy that I had already made. This is what I use as kind of a measuring template. Now I have provided a sheet that has the sizes that you can take your petals and you can hold it up to the sheet. Sometimes they get a little smaller. You could add more wool to make that a bit larger, but you can see how I use it as a base for a template. And you could do two things. You could cut a piece out and use it to measure, or you could just hold up your flower petals as I just showed, that so you can see if you've got the proper sizing. I also gave you this to show how they're combined together, and these are close to size, the photos that are at the bottom of the sheet. So that's one way. What I tend to do is I create these wool templates that I can put onto the wool, and I actually just stab around it. So I'll show you with these two pieces how I do that. But if you're going to make more than one pansy flower, then this is what I recommend. So I'll put those aside. So what I do before I start my project is I pre-measure my wool. And so these would be the two back petals. So you can see, right? And as you can see, they're about 1.5 inches, a little bit thick. If you're concerned that when you start that maybe your petals will get a little too thick, you want to have a certain thickness, then start with less wool, and you can always add more wool to your petal later. Then these are the two side petals, and this is the front heart-shaped piece, right? So again, these are a bit thinner because they're going to be smaller, and they're going to sit on both sides. And then this one here in the front, I've left it a little bit thicker. I do the feel test, so I can feel the size, and I'm going to start working with this. And I typically use around the same measurements. I do the feel test, but you can see, like, this has a certain thickness, which is perfect for pins, anything that you're going to take on and off. You could do barrettes, right? And you would glue that on the back, which I will show in a little bit when we're done with creating our flower. And again, right, so these are definitely thinner, maybe about the same size as far as measurement, but definitely not the same thickness. So when I start this project, I tend to work on the two side petals. So I work on the two side petals, I work on the heart-shaped petal in the front, and then the two in the back. And I always do my detailing as far as, like, I'll be making one that has the little black face pieces, and I always do that after I'm done combining when I stab all these pieces together. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, so I'm using, right, so again, here's my 3 templates. I'm going to be doing the small petal that are on the two sides of the heart shape. So what I'm going to do here is, just for demonstration purposes, if you were going to use the piece of paper, you would stab around the paper. And again, if you're going to make a lot of these, I would definitely make these little wool pieces. Because this is the back petal, that's the one I cut off. I'm going to use my smaller wool to measure this. So what you can see here is I'm going to hold it right on the center, and I'm going to stab around my template. I'm leaving a good 1/4 of an inch at the top. This is going to help thicken my top up a bit. Right, so what it's going to do is I'm going to fold that over, and it's going to create a thickness. So you can see how I've stabbed the shape into the wool piece. Now, again, if you were going to use the, this is, again, remember, this is the larger one. I'll show you when we do the larger petals, right? You would take it out, and then you would do the rest, which is what I'm going to show you. So I give a few stabs. What's happened is that this is now, it's pretty set into my pad. And see how I could just fold it with ease over itself because it's slightly stuck into the pad. And I'll tell you, like, once you create the petal, you're going to want to make sure that you pick it up off the pad. But for now, I want to use that to my advantage. So I'm going to fold the top down first. So see, this is where I have my top crease. I'm going to fold that down, and I'm going to connect it. Now what I'm going to do is I'll lightly pull some of the fibers loosely so that when I fold it over, I don't want to see so much of a seam, but you're going to have one side of your flower, like the petals, that you'll put on the back. And you'll put your prettier side on the front. Because you're going to either attach this to something, you're going to turn it into a pin, you could turn it into a magnet, and you're not really going to see the back. And then again with the other side, I'm just going to fold this over. And I'm just giving it some stabs with my needle. Right, so now I'm pretty satisfied that these fibers have connected, and to save my pad, I'm going to gently pull up. Can you see how you can see where it is sticking into the pad? And I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to give a few more stabs this way. Now I'm using a single needle. This is when I work on petals or things that are going to be what I would consider a bit more two-dimensional. I'll use my Clover 5-needle punch tool, and I will show a demo of that at the very end. But for now, I'm just going to show you how to create your petals using the single needle. If you bought a kit, then you'll see that I gave you one needle. It is a 38 star needle that I'm using, and it's a really good in-between needle. I use it for most of my projects. So you see how I keep flipping it over because I want to make sure that it's not going to get, what happens if I keep stabbing it into the pad, eventually it will stick to the pad, and when I go to pull it up, it's going to pull apart. So at this point, now I'm going to hold up, and you can see it's still much larger than my original piece. You also want to leave one end loose. That's how you're going to connect it to your heart-shaped petal. This is how you'll connect the pieces together. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hand, and I'm giving it a light. What I'm doing is I'm pressing on it, and I'm rubbing the fibers. What's happening is it's going to help compress the fibers a bit and help them connect a little bit better. And it also helps me remove some air bubbles in there. Now, depending on how firm you want to make your petals, you may have to give it quite a few stabs. And this is why I always recommend using a 5-needle punch tool, or at least 3 needles. What that means is that your needles are going to connect the fibers much faster than just using a single needle. For now, I'm going to leave it at that. We could always firm it up later. It still is quite... All right, I guess I can't leave it at that. I have to shrink this down some more. And again, what I can do here is I can start to fold it. Now, this is the case where maybe I made mine too thick, I feel like that ultimately when I get to the very end of my, like making the petals, that it's going to be the thickness that I want it to be. And again, as I said, I tend to use a 5-needle punch tool, which will really help compress these fibers together. So one way you can help is by stabbing sideways, and see how I'm very carefully holding my fingers. I'm not going fast. I'm just stabbing around to connect the fibers together. Now, the 38 star may not be quite as aggressive. Like if you use a triangle, a 36 triangle, it may connect the fibers a bit differently. I like having the 38 star because when we go to add details, it really helps when adding the details. And if you've taken some of my other classes, I tend to have a 38 spiral to do details. But in the case of this kit, I gave the 1 needle. So I always say experiment. If you really get into felting, just experiment. Okay, so that's good. And when I go to attach it, I can keep playing with it. I can also force punch down on the side to create more of a divot into my petal. Again, one side you're not going to see. If I feel like I have too much wool, I will hold it. So I'm going to hold it at the base and I'm going to pull some of this off. So I'm using batting for this part, right? So I'm using wool batting, which I typically use for most of my projects. So again, I've got around the right width. And if I hold it up to my sheet, it's about the size compared to the sheet. So I'm going to leave that alone. Now this is another trick. So I'm going to take the second half that I pre-measured and I'm going to stab around this. Now, I know that before I was showing you and there was about 1/4 of an inch. This has a little bit more. That's okay. You could either pull some off, or because it's so thin, I'm not too worried about it. So now I'm using my first piece to create a second piece that's going to be about the same size, because you pre-measured the wool prior to working on this part. You're going to have a piece that's going to be a pretty much the same size. Yeah, I noticed that the wool is a bit looser around the edging of this particular piece that I measured out. And so what'll happen is it'll still be about the same thickness. It's just a little bit different when I'm tacking it on. So here I'm going to stab this. Now, if you didn't buy a wool kit to go along with this video, or you decide that you're going to make more, you're going to make a lot of these pansy flowers, and you have other types of wool, I will show you how to use wool roving after I finish this petal. I'll just show you the difference between batting and roving. So that, because if you've got a stash of wool and you've got a lot of wool and you're not, you want to make a whole bunch more of these flowers, right? You want to be able to use that wool. So what I'm using right now is batting, and I'll show you roving in a few minutes. Just a lot of stabbing. Should have some music help with the stabbing. Go faster, right? And again, this is looking a bit large. I'm going to pull some wool off. I just want to make sure it doesn't stay too large. And again, I'm going to do the folding. And what I'm doing is, as I'm stabbing and I'm flipping it over, I'm also realizing that I'm just sliding my pad all over the place. What I'm doing is I want to try to get these fibers as much together, and now I'm rubbing in my hand to release some of those air bubbles and to help me bring some of the edging in a little bit more. And again, right, I'm going to keep holding my original piece petal up. I can also tell by a field test that this is still the same amount of wool, even though this looks larger. So I'm sliding all over. So I'm actually going to take my fingers and I'm pulling back the top. What's happening is when I'm connecting the fibers, if I pull on it or I stab, see how I'm stabbing sideways? I just want to make sure that I'm condensing the piece and I'm connecting the fibers in a different way. So when I stab down like this, I'm connecting the fibers into itself, and this will help to resize that shape to get a bit smaller. And again, I'm going to do this to push some of that air out and keep stabbing. So I get often asked in the classes that I teach, how do you, like if it's too big, what do you do? And my recommendation would be to start over again if it's just too big and it's not going to resize to what you want. Wow, I'm sliding all over. I put I guess I didn't really need it. I put a sheet or like a pillowcase down that's in the neutral gray to help with the recording, but I'm using my phone camera to record this, so it's actually not really needed because I'm using a large foam pad to record on, so you have the same background around. When I teach classes, sometimes I have a smaller pad, so I like to have the neutral gray. It actually helps the camera a little bit more to adjust the colors. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I highly recommend Googling neutral gray. Photographers use the neutral gray to, if you're manually working with a camera to set the aperture and the speed, it's all dependent on use neutral gray to kind of get that mid-tone of the colors. It's really, really nice. I actually use a neutral gray when I take photos of my art. All right, so I'm getting there. These are the two side petals. I usually like to have, I love teaching in, either on Zoom or in person, because then I can have some banter and chat with people. I feel like I'm a little bit, I'm just talking to myself, but I'm talking to you. You're here with me, so. So again, just a few more. So you can see why I like using a 3-needle punch tool. It really does speed up the process. I can make flowers in about 45 minutes, this from petal to end. We'll see how long this video records for to see how long it takes me using a single needle. So if you become an avid felter, I highly recommend investing in multi-needle tools. You can pretty much go to any, you could search online, you could always email me and ask what one I would recommend. I usually use the Clover needles, and there's a few places you can purchase those depending on where you live, like what country you're in. Amazon usually carries the needle, the tools, and usually the replacement needles. All right, so they're not quite perfect, but I'm going to go with this, and you can see they'll go on each side of my heart shape, right? So I'm going to make this piece next. And because these got a little larger, I'm going to make sure I leave this one a little bit larger. And so if I held my petals up, so if I pinched them to what came in like this paper, right, they're about the same. And as I said, I can play with this as I attach it on. Okay, so now here's my heart shape. I call it the heart shape. It's really just the front of the petal. This is a one that I pre-made where I could show some different detailing on, so you get a few ideas of ways that you can decorate your pansy flowers. So now I'm doing, this one doesn't need to have a loose end, right? If you look at the other two petals that I made, I left each end loose, and these are going to connect into the heart shape. But this one sits on top, so I want it to be one solid piece. So I'm stabbing all the way around, and I'm trying to encourage this divot, like which would be the top of the heart, right? So I'm basically making an upside down heart. Now, this one I may need to add a little bit more wool, but I'll determine that later. And so I'm going to fold where the point is first, and then I'm going to fold around that. And again, you want to try to have even amounts of wool. This might, as I said, I may need to do some adjustments. I definitely want to keep this piece, I don't want to get too large, right? So I'm going to hold this up. And so as I fold over, that I'm still able to keep where my divot is. But at any point, right, you can really just push that divot. And this side might, like, it looks like there's a lot more wool hanging off this side. It's not an exact science, but what I can do is when I fold it over, in fact, what I might do is pull some off and then stack it on. I don't want like one side to be really thick and then the other side to be super, super thin. So again, I can come back and I can stab this side since I pulled it up. And then I'm going to fold this over. And I really want, I am pulling some off, but what I want to do is really make sure that that it looks a bit even when I fold it over. And picture this as a heart shape. And if you cut out of that template that I gave you, right, you can play with it some more. Right, you could use that to measure up to as well. So you can see right now, I'm just going to put some of the loose aside for now. And I'm going to work on condensing this down a bit. And remember, I said I was going to leave it a little bit larger because my other pieces got a little larger. So this is a good size. So I'm just going to start punching, stabbing the needle into it to start to flatten it and connect those fibers even more. I'd like this to be stay a little thicker. And always encouraging this piece here. Now, if you have only one needle to your name, you want to be careful when you start pulling on wool with your needle. It's always better to pull on it with your hand. But if you are a seasoned felter or you felted enough before, then you know how hard that you can push. You know, if I do any dragging, see, I'm just lightly dragging my hand. I'm not going pushing in really hard, and that way I don't have to worry about my needle breaking or bending. Bending or breaking, they're both equally bad. If you bend your needle, you can still use it, but it might. There's a little piece of something I don't want in there. Right, so it may not. Yeah. Right, so now I'm playing with this here, and again I want to push this down a little bit. So see how I'm using my finger. I'm pulling these fibers and then stabbing. So what's happening is I'm connecting the fibers closer together. Now because this one I'm going to leave a little bit larger than initially planned, I'm going to, instead of necessarily measuring it with this, I'm going to see how it looks with my other petals. This one's still quite large, so this is where I'm going to start to I'm really going to push on this. Now, slow and steady always wins the race. If you go too fast, when you're stabbing directly into your foam pad, if you go really fast, what'll happen is you could hit your needle, and if you give a slight bend, you'll wind up bending or breaking your needle. So, felt this in a bit more. Just trying to make this one a little bit smaller. Checking on my pad, I actually created these a bit larger for another project, and it's sitting over in the corner over there. Just make sure I didn't grab the wrong ones. And again, anytime I stab near my fingers, I've been doing this for quite a while, so I mean, felting in general. So you just want to make sure that if you get close to your fingers that you don't stab too close. Like you don't go, I would go slower as you're stabbing near your fingers. I just pulled some more wool off. I'm finding that the thickness on the edge is good. It just seems like it might be a little thick on the here. Like I want it to be thick, but I don't want it to stay too thick. As long as it's got some loose edging on it, when we go to attach it to this piece, it'll connect nicely to it. Also, I'm just trying to get maybe a little bit more off so that it evens up that piece a little bit. Now, if you keep trying to resize a piece and say this one you just can't get this smaller, you could always add a little more wool to your second piece. So let's see what we get. Let's keep working. This heart shape is still quite loose, and because I want it to be a little thicker, oops, sorry for the arm reach, I'm going to just attach some of what I pulled off to the one side. Now, the side that I kept folding on is the side that I'm going to use for the back, especially when we go to connect the other petals into it. And I'm going to go ahead and connect those petals together before we make the larger petals. As long as that these three petals match each other, your back petals, as long as they're larger, right? We don't need to worry so much. Like you want it to work like when you go to connect it together, but they can be made separately and attached at a different time. So because this pad has a little bit of a divot in the middle, I'm just moving my piece a little higher up so that I get a little more traction with my foam pad. And as I'm feeling, I want to add a little bit more to this side. So again, these are all pieces that I pulled off initially because I thought it was too thick on one side. And now I'm building up. And again, always flip over. Right, so as you're stabbing directly up and down into your piece, you always want to make sure you pick up and flip over. I noticed that like I don't stab deep enough, I don't think, to really connect into the pad after I do the initial flowers. And again, see, I'm rubbing in my hand, and this really helps with something that's got a solid edging on it. It helps to bring it together, and I can feel when I press on it that it's actually removing some of those air bubbles that are in there. All right, and so again, I hold it up to here just to get a feel. I do want there to be a little bit of a slight curve on the edging. Again, it's not the end of the world if it's not exactly perfect. It is a flower. It is organic, so it will do its own. They won't look perfect, right? Like nothing is perfect. Nothing stays perfect. So don't aim for perfection, just aim for accuracy. And as long as it looks good with the other pieces, like when you go to connect them, right? That's what's most important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach these two sides, and then I'm going to I could then at that point play with a little bit of a curve, or maybe I'll like it. So I'm going to attach the one side first. So what I do is I take a look at where it sits, right? So I'll bring my other piece, right? So that they sit on either side of this heart shape, right? And you want to see a bit of this point on the end. So I flip it over with the loose end, and I start to stab it into the heart shape, the upside down, right? So it's upside down heart shape. You have your guide for reference. So now I'm attaching it by stabbing the side. And to really connect it, I flip it over and I stab on the other side. I find with the pictures of pansies, I'm always looking at pictures, right, to get ideas for colors. I find that these front ones are typically, most of the time, the same color. When we go to add the back petals, I'll show you what happens. The darker color is going to wind up attaching to, it's going to come through our shape, but maybe maybe that's a desired look. All right, so now I'm going to attach this petal on, and as I attach it on, I'm going to make sure that it's about the same size. So even though this one was a little bit bigger, I'm actually placing it on the heart shape a little further down, and I'm just going to give some stabs right now. I just want to lightly connect the fibers. I can still pull this off. I can pull that piece off if I want to, I realize I don't like how it looks. So now I'm flipped it over and I'm stabbing from the other side. This is where we can start to work with the heart shape a bit more and connect those fibers a little differently. So front and back. And if this one seems a little large, what I tend to do with these is to help connect them better. I'm folding the petal over and I'm stabbing on the side. What this is going to do is it's going to bring these two pieces a little closer together. So see how loose this is? This one's not as loose anymore. And again, I will stab directly into it. And this side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to fold it over and I'm looking at it. I just want to make sure that it's about the same. Okay, it's in about the same spot. So again, I'm just slightly stabbing into it to shrink it a little bit. And now I'm going to fold it over like this and I'm going to stab directly onto it. And I'm stabbing it into the side just so that I can have these petals connect a little bit differently. And then I'm going to stab down and I'm going to stab from behind. And this is where I can take my needle on a side angle. And again, when you're stabbing like this, you want to make sure that if I'm going to stab sideways, I'm always pulling out in the same direction that I stab. It's just a little reminder for you. And then I'm going to, again, stab in the front to make sure that these are connected. Right, so you just keep stabbing it till you get it to be the firmness that you want. And as you see, I'm flipping it back and forth. Right, and so this is how I connect the petals. Now, I usually wait toward the end to do any of the detailing. So I'm going to set this piece aside and I'm going to work on the two back petal pieces, which is where I have, so here's my two samples. All right, so this is my wool sample for that, and here's the paper sample. So just to show you with the paper sample, right, because I didn't do that before. So I'm going to stab around. And again, I pre-measured these pieces at the very beginning before I started. And I just stabbed the shape into my wool. And I removed it, right? So see, I took it off. Same if you used this, right? You would stab around that and then you would pull that off. And once I create one, I just use the one that I created to help match right when I go to do the second piece. All right, so this time I'm going to try something a little different than I did before. These are just different ways that you can do this. I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to pull it over. I'm right-handed, so I'm being very careful. I used my left hand to pull it over. And I'm going to stab the side first. Then I'm going to tuck around the top edge. This is a different way of doing the same thing where I folded the top down first and then was stabbing it. This is another way to try it. Maybe this will give you a little more control over your piece. And again, you can hold up and just make sure, right? So you can stab just to make sure. And then I'm going to fold this over just to make sure it's going to be around the right size for you. Oh, sorry. Everything keeps moving around. All right, so this piece is quite thick. I probably could have gone a little thinner. So I'm just going to go with it, but I would say that next time I would make it, I would remove a little bit of wool, and I would probably go with something that's a couple layers. And I did say I was going to show you how to use roving, so I will show that after I finish this one petal. I will show you if you're using roving, or someone, you know, once you start felting, I find people tend to just give you wool. Oh, I thought you might like this. Like in other words, they were going to start it, but they decide they were never going to do it again. So a lot of times you get free wool that way. I know I have. I have sometimes had people. I had someone give me a whole bunch of 2 boxes of wet felted and some really nice wool, and even some tools, which I was just super nice. You know, she just decided she didn't want to do it anymore. All right, so doing these large petals, I might wind up being here a while. I should do the cooking show version where I'm like, oh, miraculously, it's done. So I'm gonna do this just to get some of those air bubbles out and to get those fibers a bit more together. So now I have the luxury that I can actually hold it up to what I've made. So the size of this is pretty good. I do want to firm it up a bit more, so I will be doing more stabbing to this. And as I said, I might be shifting it around on my pad because I've got a big divot here in the center. Now, if you're working with 2 different colors, right? So I had made a sample. I made the pieces. I didn't actually put it together, where it's going to be dark purple with yellow, and so in this case, the dark purple with the yellow. Oh, lost my train of thought. See, it even happens in recorded videos. Yeah, so these would be the back petals, and these would be the 2 side petals. All right, Cathy, concentrate. Okay, we're going to concentrate. Happens to the best of us, doesn't it? This is unscripted, so I'm teaching this as if I was teaching a class, minus the questions that students usually have. Oh, I know what I was talking about. Okay, so 2 different colors. So if you're going to be doing something that's so different, like you're going to be doing white on red, or you're going to be doing yellow on purple, my recommendation is to flip your pad over if you're using a foam pad like the one I have here. Or if you're using a brush, I have a dark brush and a light brush, right? So in other words, it's like a bristly brush. Clover makes one. I've heard people, they rig up their own, where they take some nylon brushes, kind of like a shoe brush, you know, like they're just all these nylon bristles, and I've heard them using that to felt on. And if you're using one of those, I actually have one for light colors and one for dark colors. That's just a little aside about using the pads. And as I said, you know, I actually felt with the nylon brushes when I do flat felting like this. You can see the divot in the center of this, and sometimes you lose some control over how well you can connect these fibers together. And I got a piece that's not meshing, so I removed it. All right, so again, I'm doing this to remove air bubbles. You can remove air bubbles by pressing like this. And then I'm just going to go around the edges. So I'll just hold it up like this so you can see. So I'm stabbing along the edges, up and down. If I stab diagonally, I'll probably wind up stabbing my fingers. So just be careful when you're holding up. But that's now condensing my edges in, and let's measure it with the piece that we were working on, and I think that's good. So I'm going to create my second piece. It's still a little soft. Again, you could keep stabbing and stabbing and it'll firm it up. If you want it to be really firm, like in the case of this, I would recommend getting some of those multi-needle tools. Though these back petals are a little bit softer. All right, so let's make that last. Oh, yeah. So I said I was going to show you with roving. So this is roving. This is batting. So batting comes in these sheets. It comes in like a large sheet, and I pull it, I stack it so that I get it to the same thickness, right? When it comes to roving, roving is quite stringy. Can you see how it's all in one direction? So if you're going to use roving, what I usually do is I pull off, and it won't felt as thick. So if you really want a thick piece, right, I would recommend stacking it, right? So what I'm doing is I'm pulling the fibers and making them a little shorter so that I can create a stacked piece. And then this is where you can take your, outline, and I'm going to stab around it. Now, when you're using roving, I also find it tends to stay a bit stringier, which means that I usually can typically see the lines in it, like the lines of the fibers. And I find that the roving tends to stay a little bit thinner and a little bit less, like I don't have as much control when I'm working with it. But this is how I do it. And again, you can hold up your piece. So I'll fold this part in. It's also going to stick to my pad more because of the length of the fibers is longer. So this is using roving. So I'll flip it over, and as long as the fibers are in the same direction, I try to make sure I connect it that way. And I'm going to be doing a lot of playing with this, right, to get it to be what I want it to be. But it's doable, it's usable. Now, if you use core wool, right, so if you have, I use core roving, core chunky, core batting. It's usually natural white, and you could use that to create a base. Like this is core roving. So I could just take some of the roving and I can just place it over if I feel like the thickness, because you can see how loose. I'll show you, I made this piece at a different time. So I'm going to be spending a bit more time to get these to the right thickness, but it's not impossible. And you can see, like, you can see where the seams are, and I could keep working on that to get this to condense down. Now, if you see a lot of seam marks, you could take you could take some of the roving and you could lay it over, stab that in, flip it over, and as long as the fibers are in the same linear direction, right, you can get that to stab in. There's different ways that you can use the roving. I typically use batting when I make these, but it's not, you could definitely create using roving. So that's just a little bit of a aside for those of you who have extra pieces of roving, or you didn't buy a kit with the batting. That's what you can do with it. All right, so now I'm going to take the second piece and I'm going to stab this in to the other piece that I have. Now I did take a little bit off, like I had another little segment. So if I do feel like I need to thicken up to match the piece, then I will. And see, I laid that one on top and I stabbed the shape so that I have something that's going to be around the same shape. And see how I wound up starting? I don't know. I have this thing. I start at the top and fold down, and then I fold one side down and then the other side. Again, there's not a right or wrong way, as long as your fibers will blend in with the other fibers. And if I didn't stress it before, the reason that I use, like, if I'm doing yellow and purple, I don't want cross-contamination of those two colors in my piece, right? So if I don't want there to be yellow in my purple, then I will make sure that I have one side where I punch the purple color and the other side where I punch the yellow color. Sometimes you try to clean your pad out as much as possible. I noticed that when I was working initially on this color, I was noticing a little bit of like a greenish color that maybe was being pulled up from deep in my pad, right? So just letting you know that there are sometimes there's just, right, you do your best and but I mean, maybe it works. I can't really see it all that much now that I put the pieces together. It just seemed like it was a little bit of cross-contamination. Okay, so now I'm going to start holding it up and so I can start to really shape this piece to match the other piece. Now, one piece is going to fold over the other. So if one is a little bit thinner, that's okay. But if you are having a problem with thick and thin, so if I start feeling these, and this one feels a bit thinner, what you can do is you can take some of your batting. I pulled it off a piece like this. I just pulled some batting off, and you can lay that on top, and this will help you thicken it, right? So I would go thin and do thin layers until you get it to the same thickness as the other one. If you go too thick, like you don't want to go like, you're going to keep going back and forth on the thickness and everything, right? So you want to be careful how much you add to it. It's amazing how much you don't need that, right, when you're getting to that stage. Trying to make sure I don't stab myself. I have stabbed myself in class before, and I'm like, ooh, does that look good that the teacher stabbed themselves? But it happens to the best of us. So now I'm going to keep stabbing this. And again, see how I'm using my fingers to help pull some of that edging in. And when I'm stabbing around my fingers, I'm really holding my fingers back. Now, I have seen people use little like leather gloves, like little tips. There are tools out there that look like duck bills. So whatever works for you, so you don't stab yourself. If you're super aggressive felter, you stab too much, or if you need reading glasses and you're refusing like me to get them, then I joke, but I do need to go. I'm gonna look at bifocals just because I do with the phone today, and then if I'm teaching, right, I need to be able to look up and see people's faces, but I also need to look down at the same time. And I don't know about you, but every time you have to take glasses on and off, it's a bit disruptive. So again, I'm using my hand to get these fibers a little bit closer together, and I'm also using it to remove some of the air bubbles. And again, I'm going to hold it together to see if they're the same size. I'm seeing there's a bit of wool on this edge, so I'm going to pull some of that off. I have a little pile going on over here. Ooh, there we go. We're sliding around. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to get rid of this. There we go. There we go. I probably won't slide around as much. It just was the pillowcase was sliding around. So a failed experiment. It happens. All right. So for time's sake, I'm going to just stab it up here, like on an edge that's not so into the foam pad. You can see how it's divoted in. To save my pads, that's why I use the brush tools. All right, so all right, so let's give a few more stabs on this one. And I think these are good. They're going to work really nicely. Okay, let's not see it's still sliding around. I guess I was wrong. So now I'm going to hold these up. I find that I like it when the one folds over on this side. It doesn't matter when I say folds over. See how I would, if I tacked this one on first and I put this one on behind, this petal would be in the front. I tend to like the petal in the front over on this side. I don't know. I don't know why. I just do that. And also make sure you look at your petals to see which one has a nicer side. I'm going to use this one over, I don't know, I'm going to use this one over here. Okay, so now I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to start stabbing it into this shape. Now you're going to see the cross-contamination. I'm doing this on purpose. So I'm using the loose fibers on the one piece to connect into the other piece. You can't see it too badly, but I'm going to definitely be punching more in on the front to the back than the back to the front. And depending on how thick you made your flower, like how thick you made your petals, sorry, might also determine, like, I can sideways stab this in and I won't see the color come through nearly as much as if I go straight up and down. Now, if you're going to be adding black, right, so if you're going to be adding that little black face into the front, having some cross-contamination is not going to be as big a deal either. And it could give it some extra, because I'm using purple and purple, it could give it an extra little texture that maybe you wouldn't have had otherwise. So now I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to lay it on the back, but see how I'm measuring it on the front first. Like, I want to make sure that this is going to look good, and you want the petals at the top to be about the same height. This looks good to me, so I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to give it some stabs. I'm doing this initially to connect. Then I'm going to flip it over and I'm really going to start stabbing it in. And I'm going to start to shape this middle petal at this point. I'm also going to stab, sorry, I'm shifting around on here. I'm really going to stab, like I could stab here in the center. I'm finding that without using the punch tools, it's a little softer than I'm used to. But I can really get these petals to connect together through the center here. I can also work on shaping the petals as I'm stabbing in. And I also can tell that this is thickening up these front petals a bit. You can also stab, so here's the sideways stabbing into, right, so this, when I say sideways stabbing, I'm stabbing on a diagonal, so maybe it won't quite punch through the front, with, like, the needle might not come through the front as much as if I stab it straight up and down like this, right? So again, if you're doing something where you have a yellow front petals and a darker back petal, then you'll want to try not to punch through too much on the one side. And again, if you had one of these punch tools, right, you would be able to firm this up a bit faster. All right, so there's my petal. I can start to encourage it to curve. And I would say I would do that after you add your detailing. So if you're going to add a little face to this one, what you're going to do is you're going to take some black. And I honestly, I'd probably better if I pre-measured these beforehand. I typically don't. But right, so you want to get maybe two pieces that are about the same. And I'm going to start on this side. So how I do this is I tuck some of the black into the base of where the heart shape is. Now, typically with these faces, like put quotes on the face, typically with these faces, it won't go all the way to the edge, right? So it creates this little right? You want to have a little edge. Now, if you stab, you can have a nice hard edge by stabbing into the color, or you could have it gradiate a little bit by encouraging those edges to remain a little bit looser. So what I'm doing right now is I'm stabbing it. You could stab it a little bit sideways like this, and this will help to spread it out. I want to have an even amount, like top to bottom here. So I'm going to do this. Now I can always come in and take a little bit more. This is just black batting that I'm using. I just have a little piece I have sitting over on the side. And I can take a piece and help to even out. Like, so if I want this to be even all around, see how I could just add a little bit more. Because I'm using batting, so when I go to do that, see how I've got it really, I loosened it up. This is going to help blend the color to the rest of the color, right? So in this case, I want to fill in this spot here a little bit. And as long as the edges are looser, it'll just blend right into what I've already punched in, right? So that's just an option. Maybe you don't want as much. So see, it's not in completely. I can use my fingernail, or I can just punch in. And it's okay, you could rotate things around. I'm trying to hold it in the center, but really I need to rotate it around. So this is my second piece that I measured. It looks like I've got a little bit of a line there. I don't know where that came from. So now I'm going to tack this in, and I'm going to, while it's loose, I'm going to try to encourage it to look about the same as the other side. Now, because this is, I'm right-handed, I'm on the right side, now I can hold it straight like this, but feel free if you need to rotate your petals. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be straight up, right? You don't have to have it always like this when you're working on it. You can flip it around. So this is me adding the black in here. And again, it's a flower, so it doesn't necessarily have to be completely even, right? And again, if you want there to be like loose edges, you could take your fingernail and you could rub on that so I could loosen up some of that edging. Or you could just have your hard edge by stabbing into your color, right? So what I'm doing is I'm actually going along the edging and I'm dragging my needle around very gently, and I'm pushing the color into itself. If you want to get some of the back color in through, maybe that'll give it a little dimensionality. You can stab through the other side. Let's see what happens. So see how some of that lighter came through, so that will give you more dimensionality. So I'll do that on this side as well. So what's happening is now I'm using the color to help create a bit of a blending, just a little bit of something more than what it was. And this one didn't go through as much as the other one, and tidy up. Right. So those are different things you can do. If you want your petal to be a little more square on the edge, you can encourage it by stabbing it sideways, and then you have a bit more of a square. I'll often come in as well and I'll stab around the edging to tidy that up, and I want to encourage a bit of that point here, and I can actually use the folding to help me get that edging back. And again, I always like to make sure I can still see that seam between the petals, even though maybe I'm stabbing, like I just keep stabbing back and forth, right? So again, as you're firming up your piece, right, you want to make sure you can still see that petal separation. Now for this front, right, so for the front piece, what I tend to do is this. So I'll take, if you want to have a rounded edge before you start, you can actually use your finger to just gently, what I'm doing is I'm rolling it in my finger, and what's happening is it's just curving the edge there. And I can place this down where I want it on my heart shape. I would have used a slightly larger piece, so I'll show you. When I pulled it off, I don't know, it seems to be some random edging that I have over over in this little pile that I have going on over on the side. So I would have used something a little longer that would actually connect up toward the top. So this would be more ideal. But I can add some more on this side right after I attach this on. So here I'll attach this on. And you can go all the way up to the top. You don't have to. And there is definitely an edging. So look at pictures of pansies. There, if you do the face, there's usually a thin edge along the sides, and it does look a bit like this. I don't know if any of you who are watching this are Alice in Wonderland fans, but if you recall the Disney cartoon Alice in Wonderland, they had little pansies singing at one point, and they all had the little faces. Someone called it a face, and it looks like a face to me. These little pansy faces. And again, you want to make sure that it's even on both sides. We're going to add that little yellow to the petal right here, so don't worry if your black is getting a little bit wonky here. Or you can encourage it by stabbing it more into the shape, right? So I can use my finger and just gently pick with my fingernail so that I have a bit of an edging up here. And again, if I'm trying, like, so say that I have a little piece and I just want to fill in right there, I'm going to use a very thin piece of my batting to just make sure that it blends in with the other batting. Black is an easier color than if you're using other colors. I'm just giving you tips because I don't know what colors you're going to do, and certainly would love to see what your final pieces look like. Because there's just so many color combinations. Now, if I want this to be a little bit smaller, right? See how I'm stabbing into the color, and that's shrinking it up just a little bit. And you can, at this point, like I could pull on it a little bit and see if I could spread it out a little bit more. And if you did a little bit of that stabbing, right? I'm going to do it on this one as well, just so it looks a little more even. Like, so in other words, if you're seeing some color coming through here and here, I want to make sure that I have that same look going on in this middle one as well. All right, so the final thing on doing a pansy is to add this little yellow in that center. Now, it's funny, this is actually part of it. The color is on this petal. So it's not like a dot. I mean, you could make it a dot, but if you want it to be more accurate, what it actually is you're gonna stab it, and you're gonna want to keep. I'm gonna make a little circle here, and I'm gonna try to keep that triangle feel to it. It doesn't always go the way I want it to, but if you think of it as part of the petal. I'm just holding it a little differently. If you think of it, it's part of the petal, then you want to make sure that it is part of the petal, so that if you have that sharp edge, that you make sure that this petal is also, like this yellow is also part of that sharp edge. And I mean, like if you're working on a point, and that's usually rounded along the front here. So that's pretty much a pansy flower, and as I said, you could keep working on it to firm it up. This one's pretty good. Like, this is going to be a good one. I just want to make sure that if I'm going to add a pin backing or whatnot to this, when you go to add it, right, you're going to want to put the pin up more toward the top, and I'm going to record a short snippet of a video. Which I'll add to this one, showing you a couple of the things you can do as far as making it a magnet or whatnot, right? So there's the flower. Now on this piece, I'm just going to show you, so sometimes the pansies have these little stripes, right? These little stripes that come radiating from the middle. This heart shape might have about 5, and these 2 side petals might have 3. So what I do is I take a piece of my black. Now, if you have Roving, you could just pull a strip off the side of Roving. If you're using batting, I pulled a piece off and I'm going to roll it in my hand. What I'm doing here is I'm creating what I call a wool thread, or like a longer piece of wool. And you could try to get it consistent by pulling all the same sizes. I don't mind it being a bit more random. So if you're going to do these stripes, right, I tacked it on one end, and see if I keep stabbing it, I call it the vortex. So this one side's going to just keep sucking into where I'm stabbing. So I'm going to hold the one side. I'm just going to stab along this thread that I made. And I'm just going to connect it into that piece. So I'm going to make another piece. Again, I'm just going to pull a piece off, right? So maybe like this, and I'm going to roll it in my hand. If you're going to roll it, like you could roll it with your fingers. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll roll in one direction on my hand like this, and then I'm going to lay that in here, and I'm going to create these little stripes. So you tack it on one spot, and then you stab down, and you always hold the one side because it'll suck into the vortex, right? So here. And then if I add a third one, right, so I created a third piece, and I can attach it like that. And that would be the lines. And I would do the same thing on the other side. I would probably make this a little bit more of a radiating look, but for purposes of showing you the technique, right? So look at pictures, and then that'll give you ideas on what to do as far as adding stripes. The final thing I just want to share with you is, so I've seen some of these purple petals that have maybe that has a gradient on, or you want to play around and add a gradient on the tips of your flowers. Now, that might be easier to do this before you attach all the pieces together. I'm looking here, and I tried to do it a little bit on here. It didn't quite work out, but so what you're going to do is you're going to have a really thin piece of your color, and you're just going to start tacking that on. And you may have to do a few layers of this, right? You're going to, right, like right now, I've just put a little bit on. I definitely want to go a bit thicker, and I want to make sure, again, like I said, I want those edges loose. So when I go to tack this on, right, it's blending in more. Would I do this on purple? I probably not, but you at least can see what I'm talking about. And you could always use your finger to just lightly scrape to try to get rid of some of those stab marks. Maybe you need to go a bit thicker so you don't quite see those stab marks. And perhaps like, okay, so I added some there, so I'm going to add a little more on this edging. And again, it's experimental, right? So you'll play around with it, right? So I'll tuck it over and stab it in the other side. Right? And if you don't like it, you could always pull it out. So see how I just used my hand and I just pulled it out to determine whether you like that or not. Okay, so I promised you I was going to show you different ways of things that you could do for when you make these pansies. So in the case of this one got a little larger than my original, which is completely fine. And so I have this, it's a pin clip. So it can be a pin or it could be a clip. So it's got an alligator clip. And what you can do is you can glue this to the back, and then it gives you an option. You can have either the clip or you could have it as a pin, right? So this makes it a little more versatile for people who maybe don't know what to do with a pin. And in this particular case, I would still attach it closer to the top, but right, the clip, because what happens is when you go to add it on, if it's too low to the bottom, it's going to be top heavy, so it's going to be flopping, right? It's going to be flopping forward like that. So I would recommend putting this up here. And how I do that is I use this glue. It's a super glue with it, and it's a gel, and it works like a miracle on felt pieces, because what it does is, and it works on ceramics too, it adheres into the fibers, right? And so it like seeps in, so it gives it a really strong connection. So I highly recommend using the super glue, and in this case you would just put some in here. It's about 30 seconds to adhere. You need to let it cure for 24 hours, but I've actually worn pins within 30 minutes. Here you've got a pin back. So it'll work on this size, but because this one got a little larger, right, I would say the pin works a bit better on the smaller size. Again, like this gets quite a bit larger if I were to put it on here. So again, I would put it up closer to the top, and I just hold it down like this, and I wiggle it a little bit. For this particular, it's a bar pin, right? It's a bar pin bag. And I wiggle it a little bit so that it will adhere a bit better. And sometimes after I hold it down for the 30 seconds, I'll blow on it a little bit to help it dry faster. Then I will unhinge it to make sure that maybe the fibers didn't glue it to the to the pin itself, right? Like you want it to still be able to turn. So I will check that because like you can rip it off, but I find that this really does adhere well even after like that 30 seconds to 1 minute. So you'll want to make sure you check that. Another option is to make a magnet. So you could glue a magnet back. This is an earth magnet, and it actually is quite strong. Right, so I tend to use that if you're going to make a magnet. Now, something that I haven't tried yet is I bet you I could glue this on and then make a pin by connecting the two magnets, as long as the magnet is strong enough. So then you could wear it as a magnet pin on your jacket, on your blazer, if you're worried about putting holes into a scarf, right? So you have that option. Again, I use the same glue, so I'm constantly using this glue. And then here's another little, this is just the clip, right? So maybe you just want a clip. Maybe it's a hair clip. You could always attach a barrette, right? You could put a couple together and have well, maybe not so much. If they were thin, like, so if you're going to do like a hair barrette with a few pansies on it, I would make it thinner. Something this thick, you probably would only just have this, right? And you could, again, clip it to your hair, clip it to a bag, clip it to a scarf. So those are just some ideas of ways that you can connect your, right? You could connect your, what you could do with your pansies. I've seen people put it on hats, scarves, jackets. I made one as pins, and people put it on their fridge. So you've got a lot of different ideas. One other thing I might recommend is that you could always also, if you've knitted a scarf, or you wet felted a scarf, or you've done anything that you've made, maybe a wool sweater, because it's wool, it will attach. So you would just take it to your piece, and you could just keep stabbing at it, and it will connect into the fiber. I would say that once you've gotten it to this point, I would probably use some glue on top of that, or sew it. So you can get sewing needles through any wool projects that you made. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of things that you can do with your pansy pin. So thank you for needle felting pansies with me. If you have any questions about anything I talked about in the video, please reach out to me. And also, I'd love to see your pansy pictures, so send me some pictures. All my contact info will be at the end of this video, and then it'll also be in the comments area. So thanks again, and have a great day.